Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Let's just get right into the news. Prime Minister Mark Carney's Liberal government budget barely passed. 170 votes in favor to 168 votes against. I'm going to show you the tape of it passing in just a second here, but this is as close as you could get. Technically, one other person could have voted against it, but still, there was only one other party that supported this budget, and that was the Greens. It was just the one Green MP, Elizabeth May, who voted in favor of the budget with the Liberals. And even that wasn't a majority of MPs. There was just three other opposition MPs who decided not to vote. And so the Liberals were able to pass this budget with the skin of their teeth. I believe this is going to be the setup for a 2026 spring or summer election. Very clearly, the NDP did not want to pass this thing, the Bloc did not want to pass this thing, and the Conservatives did not want to pass this thing. And I think very shortly into the next year, they will be back for their pound of flesh. But now let's just go to the tape and we will talk a little bit about it afterwards.
Yeas pour 170, 170. Nays contre 168, 168.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
They do display the number wrong on screen. They show 177 to 168, but it was 170 to 168. I'm actually amazed by how often these things are screwed up during parliamentary streams where they end up entering the wrong numbers in. It was 170 to 168. I believe it was three MPs who abstained. It may have been four, but they were NDP and one Conservative, that Conservative being Matt Genero. You will know that that is the one Conservative MP who is going to be resigning sometime in the spring if there isn't already a federal election happening at the same time. And so I think that maybe for personal reasons, maybe for strategic reasons, he was not present for the vote. But the entirety of the NDP caucus, if they did vote, voted against it. The only people who didn't vote against it just didn't vote at all. And so the budget ended up sailing through, not because people were endorsing it, but just because the other parties didn't really want to stop it that badly. The NDP definitely didn't like the budget, but the problem is they are a combination of broke and they do not have a permanent leader. Their current leader is interim leader Don Davies, and so they didn't exactly want to face an election without actually having a permanent leader installed heading up the party. And now, again, Matt Genero probably skipped it for personal reasons or maybe for strategic reasons. But regardless, this is setting us up for a federal election because, again, the other parties are not happy at all. They didn't like the fact that they had to let this budget be passed just simply because it's so early going. Because the conventional wisdom is that you don't call an election this early or you're going to look really, really bad. I want to jump over now to some of the press conferences that have started to go on with the other parties. The CBC has a live stream here where they're talking, the different party leaders are coming out and giving their reaction. So let's start off with, in fact, what is the most important party in this scenario, the NDP.
Standing behind him, about to explain why the NDP just did what they did. Let's listen in.
In the lead up to Budget 2025, New Democrats made it very clear that it needs to address head-on the crises facing Canadian families and invest in the programs that Canadians rely on. We have record unemployment, particularly among young people. We have a housing shortage and a cost of living crisis in communities across the country. Our cherished public healthcare system needs to be expanded, not cut. We need better childcare. Since the budget was presented almost 2 weeks ago, we have taken the time to listen to our constituents and to meet with stakeholders. It is clear from those conversations that this is a budget that does not address the real needs facing Canadians. It fails to meet the moment, deliver transformational change, or address the urgent needs facing Canadians. While there are elements of the budget which reflect our concerns, on the whole, this is a conservative budget. From reducing healthcare funding to provinces.
This is all kind of silly overall because the budget is actually massive. It's running a $78 billion deficit, which is the biggest raw dollar deficit that's ever been run in Canadian history. But because there may be some slight spending reductions in some areas the NDP cares about, they can't support this thing. Now, this is just classic political brinksmanship. Really, the reality is that the NDP simply needs to oppose the Liberals. That sounds like a very shallow statement, but it's true. Jagmeet Singh was so just complicitory with the Liberals. He went along with every single vote with them. There was no point in the NDP existing with Jagmeet Singh around. That the NDP actually needs to artificially complain about everything now in order for them to show their left-wing progressive base that they're somehow better than the Liberals. Really, I could see the NDP pretty much passing the same budget with maybe a slightly different balance between infrastructure spending and operating budget expenses. They would be blowing out the deficit too. The mix of spending would just be slightly different, but this is enough for the NDP these days to oppose it simply because they only have 7 seats and they need to find an excuse to call an election next year in order for them to at least double it so they can get their official official party status back.
To making deeper cuts to services than Stephen Harper's budgets did, including to programs that are helping Canada's most marginalized communities, to reversing action on the climate crisis. This budget fails to deliver the policies our country needs.
Which is hilarious that he's saying, like, oh my goodness, we're moving backwards on climate stuff. No, Elizabeth May just confirmed today that the Liberals were going to stick to the Paris Climate Accord and all of their other green initiatives. None of it's going away. Him saying, oh my goodness, they're cutting more than Stephen Harper ever did. Well, not really. They're going to reduce certain operating budgets by 15%, but that doesn't phase in for years. And so really, they're probably just not going to actually do it. And there's a difference in Harper cutting, and I agree with Harper cutting waste, but Harper was cutting waste back when there wasn't nearly as much waste to cut. It was still good for him to cut it. Carney is proposing that he might in the future at some point cut some waste, 15%, at a time when there is more waste than ever to cut. The fact that he can only reduce operating budgets by 15%, he's still probably not even going to do it, is ridiculous. He could cut way more because the government size has gone up by more than 50% since Justin Trudeau was in office, or since he came to office in 2015.
It particularly fails Indigenous people. But through these discussions, it became equally clear that Canadians do not want an election right now. The consequences of defeating this budget would not be to improve it or to help Canadians.
Honestly, I don't even need to go on here. What a pathetic answer from Don Davies. Don't even talk about the election. Don't make it sound like you're cowards. Say that we voted against it, but 2 of our people abstained because we need to first finish our NDP leadership race, and then we will be back to basically, exact justice on this Liberal government. That's what I would have said. But, Don Davies, not being a smart political operator, smarter than Jagmeet Singh still, he's coming out and attacking it and then saying also Canadians don't want an election right now. It's like, don't say that. You look really weak saying stuff like that. But I want to go away from that and go over to what Elizabeth May said today, just to kind of fact check Don Davies on the idea that somehow the Liberals have become, less green, less of an environmentalist party.
Can he confirm here on the floor of this House that in passing this budget, the government is committed to holding to as far below 2 degrees as possible, to funding climate adaptation, to delivering on the nature strategy, and continuing to engage in meaningful Indigenous reconciliation?
I can confirm to this House that we will respect our Paris commitments for climate change, and we're determined to achieve them. I can confirm with this House that, consistent with our Kunming Montreal commitments, the nature strategy will release in the coming weeks. We will build this country strong, sustainable, and pure for future generations.
It's always stunning to me just how kind of mediocre of a speaker Mark Carney is. There's a reason why he so often skips QP, because he's not a very confident speaker. But the optics of this are actually quite bad because it's not a Liberal NDP budget. I don't think that really bothers Canadians that much if the Liberals and the NDP teamed up to pass a budget. They got used to that going on since 2019 between Singh and Trudeau. In this budget, though, it's a Carney Elizabeth May budget. You could say, well, technically Elizabeth May could have not voted for it and it would have still passed. It would have passed 169 to 168. Okay, but the problem there is they courted her for this vote. They confirmed certain things to her. They negotiated with her to get her vote. So it very much is a red-green type of a budget because they have now committed to stupid spending initiatives that Trudeau had in order to make Elizabeth May happy. They're keeping around a bunch of wasteful spending, a bunch of really stupid environmental regulations and projects in order to make Elizabeth May happy enough to get her one vote. It's just not a very good look. I want to check how things are going in the CBC stream. I want to see if we have a new party talking because I really don't need to hear from Don Davies again. Well, we can go over now to Philippe Champagne talking to people outside of talking to people or talking to the media after the budget here. I'll also have to bring it up on screen, guys. Sorry, we're doing this very garage band here in my hotel room. Here we go.
Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne spoke to reporters just a few minutes ago. Let's listen to what the finance minister has to say on his first budget clearing a big hurdle right now.
Ms. May, that you didn't get support from the opposition?
Listen, what matters today is that, people decided to, parliamentarians, they were voting in favor, they decided to put Canada first. And that's really what matters today. People in their constituency and people are looking. There's enough uncertainty in the world. We need to come together to support Canadians, and that's why those who voted in favor, I think, have shown that they are really committed to Canada. And so, yes, we keep on working. Every day is a good day to fight for Canada. Merci. Merci, je veux dire en français. Écoutez, les parlementaires.
Yeah, we don't need to hear that in French again, but the problem for the Liberals here is, again, the fact that they couldn't get another party on side, despite having been signaling since they were elected that they're willing to work with other parties, let's unify the country, makes them look like a very disunified government with the rest of the country. And no doubt what they've done so far when it comes to the Air Canada strikes and when it comes to the proposed budget cuts, the operating expense cuts, the staffing cuts, they are going to be pushing a lot of their progressive left back over to the NDP. Because remember, the NDP in the election previous to 2025 got around 18% of the vote. In 2025, they only got 1/3 of the vote they're used to. They only got like 6.3, 6.6% of the vote. Same thing with the Bloc. Usually they get like 30% in Quebec, and I think they ended up getting like 25 or something like that. They fell from around 8% nationally, which is obviously better for them because it's all concentrated in Quebec, to around 6. Maybe they were 7.5 before, then they were 6, but it lost them like about 10 seats or so. They're going to lose a bunch more seats, the Liberals, over back to the Bloc Québécois, because they can say, see, they don't care about Quebec. Carney wishes he could just bypass us by electing a bunch of Liberals who aren't going to stand up for Quebec interests. Now, is the NDP and the Bloc's arguments good? No, I disagree with their framing of the issue. In fact, of course, being conservative, I agree with the conservatives' framing of the budget that it's blowing a crazy amount of money into the economy, trying to stabilize things, when in fact the problem is too much government. You need to cut spending, you need to cut taxes, you need to cut regulations, and the Liberals are effectively putting up more microwave Justin Trudeau type policies over again, assuming that we're going to get a different result. And what I want, is there anything else interesting going on with the live stream with the CBC? Nah, nothing in particular. Rick Bell's talking, and I like Rick Bell, but I just don't need to go over there right now. No doubt we're going to get a reaction to the budget from Pierre Poilievre in the next hour or so. I can probably cover that in a different video here, but what this is probably going to be doing, again, for the 2026 spring election is that the Liberals are going to run on the idea that we have all these achievements. We've announced all these projects that were already underway, or they're almost done, or they're things not going to be done for 5 years. And then they're going to say, well, we did all these trade deals, just vague, hollow agreements that they signed in Europe and Asia saying we should maybe trade more together. They're going to try and run on all these achievements, run on the things that the budget is supposedly going to do. But I think the problem for Carney, despite still having a net favorable approval rating. His approval rating is higher than his disapproval rating. And the fact his government even has a higher approval rating than disapproval rating, I think he thinks he has a chance to win a majority in a spring or summer election. But the problem is, I think that the emotions are on the side of those who want to get rid of him. I don't think a lot of voters who voted Liberal in this last election are going to show up again, because Trump is not going to be the top issue anymore, and Carney has objectively broken a lot of promises already. And then you're going to have those who wanted fiscal restraint, who voted Liberal, who typically vote Conservative, go back to voting Conservative. You're going to have the progressive left, who typically voted NDP but voted Liberal in this last election. Many of them will go back to voting for the NDP. And again, a lot of Bloc Québécois, Quebec sovereignty voters who voted for the Liberals because he's going to stand up to Trump, and we believe this is a party for Quebec, might go back and start voting Bloc again. So by passing this thing with just the support of Elizabeth May, they both end up looking way too left-wing to more center-right voters, and they don't look progressive enough to the NDP and the Bloc because they couldn't lock down their support. So I think the stage is set for this next election, and based on the polling right now, I think Carney thinks he can actually win it. But I also think all the other parties also think they can either win if they're the Conservatives, or they can make a lot of gains if they're the NDP or the Bloc Québécois. And so next year, 2026, is going to be chaotic, and we will be following the fallout of this as we get more details. Anyways, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all later.